Brother Orchid was a really funny gangster movie slash comedy that starred Edward G. Robinson. It came out in 1940. It's a black and white gangster film. And the thing I really liked about this film is it's really reinforced to me that some of the best films I've been discovering lately are from this 1930s, 1940s era. And it's particularly films like this one that blend elements of comedy, drama, and romance into a gangster film. And it does it in a wholesome way. There's not really too much offensive in here. And I've been thinking about it lately, and I've realized that the closer, as I'm watching these old films, the closer I get in cinema to, say, the era of the late 1960s and beyond, the more, well, honestly, the more familiar these films become in style to me. I don't mean that in a negative way. Rather, there's just something about the look, the feel, and the content of films as we get into the late 60s and beyond that just feels more like the cinema that I grew up with. Speaking as somebody in my late 40s, I generally started watching films in the 70s and beyond. And it's the cinema of that era, that look and style that I'm so familiar with, especially like the big budget cinema of the 1980s. And that will always hold a nostalgic place for me. But when we get back into like the 1930s and the 1940s era with the older black and white, it just feels so different. It's comfortable and it's entertaining. The stories and the acting are generally wonderful. And the content is never overtly strong or offensive. There's no profanity, no gory violence, and there's generally a positive and an upbeat ending. And not always, but generally. And what I'm finding is that the 30s and 40s had some of these epic actors like James Cagney, Humphrey Bogart, Edward G. Robinson, and so on, that I've been seeing so much more of. And I'll say in more obscure films. But I say obscure not necessarily to all, probably just to me. And I'm seeing films I've never heard of before. I watched something like Brother Orchid or The Wagons Roll at Night. And I just find these are like treasures. It's so cool to discover. But, it could just be me. These could be films that people have seen and know all about. And it's just like a treasure hunt. So I really am going to try to keep to that era of the 30s and 40s as I continue with this channel. Honestly, it's just me watching films, finding things I enjoy, and talking about them. And what I find too is from time to time I'll watch a film and I just don't really enjoy it. I don't really want to talk about it. A recent example was The Professionals, which I just watched with Lee Marvin, and that again was in the late 1960s. Didn't really do much for me, but I don't want to waste time giving a negative review. I've probably done that once or twice, but I really don't want to exert that energy. I want to talk about what are some good films I found, and it's so easy when we go back to this 30s and 40s era. And I went totally off track, so let me get into the review. So, the film Brother Orchid, it tells the story of Edward G. Robinson, and he's playing what he always plays so well, is this crime boss. And he is a crime boss. As the film opens, he's respected by his fellow criminals, but he makes this mistake of leaving the world of organized crime to go and do some traveling for 5 years. So he's like over in France and buying horses and stuff like that. And when he finally returns, he finds out that he's been booted from his place in organized crime, and he has been replaced by Humphrey Bogart. And Bogart, it's interesting. I'm still kind of used to seeing him as kind of the tortured hero. I think of, Rick from Casablanca. And it's interesting in these older films, he will pop up as a villain and also a character that doesn't necessarily have a lot of screen time, which is a shame because I enjoy both him and Edward G. Robinson. I would have loved to see the two of them, share a little bit more time in this movie. But he's there. He takes over the organization. And, so Robinson is basically, he's playing this gangster character, very similar to his Little Caesar character from that film from the 30s. So everyone turns on him, and apparently even his long-suffering girlfriend. You think that she's turned on him as well, and he is betrayed. He has been shot a couple times and left for dead by some of these goons, and he staggers off for shelter and finds himself near death outside of a monastery. So the friars there bring him in, they help him recover, and as he's getting his health back, he realizes he's got a decent racket going on, and he decides to stay there in hiding. And he even adopts the name of Brother Orchid. It's like his favorite flower. So a note, the story develops for about 40 to 45 minutes until we finally get to this point in the story. So I jumped into this film having no clue what in the world is Brother Orchid talking about. Then you finally start to understand, okay, so he's part of this group of friars that cultivate flowers. So he's there initially for this free ride, and, he's out planting flowers, and the brother superior thinks that he's been hardworking, but then we find out a little later he's just been ripping off some kid and having him do all the work for him while he just kind of sits in the shade and reads crime novels. So he gets told off for that. We do finally get back into the story again of the crime world, as he gets word from Anne Southern, who is the long-suffering girlfriend mentioned before, who has been waiting for him. And honestly, there is not a lot of chemistry between the two of them. She is this affectionate woman, and he's just kind of this creep to her. And she basically gets the word to him that she's going to be getting married to Ralph Bellamy. Ralph Bellamy, I remember from His Girl Friday, and he plays kind of a similar character, kind of this lumpy, I don't know how to describe it, just kind of a goofy character. Here he's like a goofy cowboy, but he treats her very well. So Edward G. Robinson goes to town to talk to him, and while he's back in the town and everything, he kind of indirectly finds out from the other friar that they're struggling to make money selling their flowers because there is this quote-unquote protective association that is run by the mob boss who is, played by Humphrey Bogart. So that's holding back the flower growers, and they don't get paid for their service because of this mob racket. So Edward G. Robinson, he wants to kind of reconcile with the old girlfriend, and he also wants to get to the bottom of what's going on with this flower mob racket. And that's kind of what this film builds up to, and I'm not going to go much beyond that. I'm not going to drop any more spoilers, but the film comes to a fine, sometimes silly resolution, and I really enjoyed it. It was a cute film, could have used a little more Humphrey Bogart, but, like I was talking about initially, this is one of those films from this era that I really enjoyed, and it's worth, checking out if you get the chance.